Okay, here's the book, Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes by me, Pete Rogers. We're going in alphabetical order. We're now on Michael Heiser. By the way, if you want, you're more than welcome to write a review of the book over at Amazon. The book's got like 1 or 2 reviews. It's actually a very good book. The way you remember all these authors, philosophers, and people of history that are interesting is by remembering their quotes. A few lines about their biography and their quotes. That's how I do it. Anyways, I'm going to tell you about Michael Heiser. He's a guy who was a scholar of the Old Testament. And one of the things I'm going to tell you is there's 1,000 or perhaps 1,000,000 times more arguments about the Old Testament than the New Testament. If you really study them, I'm not an Old Testament scholar, but I have read quite a bit of it, and I've read over 1,000 pages of commentary on it. And I'm going to tell you the conclusion you come to after you read that is it's best not to talk about it too much because there's too much to argue about. And I'm not really interested in those arguments. The most important thing as far as I'm concerned is sort of, following the teaching of Christ, okay? The Old Testament, the 10 Commandments are good. Genesis is good. But the more you go down the path of getting into the details, the more you'll find it's way, way, way more controversial and complicated than you think. And whereas I would say is there's no controversy about the teaching of Christ. Love thy neighbor. Give people the benefit of the doubt, be nice to all the poor, weak people, because most people are poor and weak and helpless, and that which you do to the least of my brethren, you do unto me, okay? If you live that way, it has a ripple effect. You're nice to people, they're nice to other people, and everybody's better off, and life on earth can become really great. And I love the Catholic tradition based on a lot of what we learned from the Greeks and whatnot. Respecting the saints, the martyrs, enjoying the feast days, having community. Religion means religare, to ligate, to tie together. All of that stuff. But what I'm just saying is if you have a lot of free time on your hands and you want to go down this rabbit hole, Michael Heiser will get you started. Okay? I'm not going to go down it anymore, but I'm just telling you, he's a smart guy and he dug into a lot of the controversy of the Old Testament. I know a bunch of other scholars that have done so too. And I don't want to go any further with it, but I'm just telling you, I know some people want this sort of thing. So go ahead, get yourself started if you want. But just be careful. You could spend the next 20 years of your life reading all that stuff. Okay, next one we'll talk about is Werner Heisenberg. He won a Nobel Prize in physics. He said, what we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning, of measurement. The first gulp from a glass of natural science will turn you into an atheist. But when you get to the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. Yeah, and I can also tell you that too. I studied biochemistry for 40 years. The more you study it, the more amazing it becomes. The plasma membrane of a cell is an electric battery. The inner mitochondrial membrane is a nuclear power plant, an electricity production plant, okay? It just gets more, it splits the atom. It gets more and more extraordinary the more you look at it. So I'll tell you the only reasonable explanation for it is God. And I say that based on knowledge of the science, okay? Extensive knowledge of the science. Because it's way, there's 3.3 billion base pairs in the human genome. The most complicated book ever written that works perfectly. You can create life. That book didn't write itself, okay? To write a little book, a 100-page book, it took a pretty good brain. It took a pretty good brain to write this book, okay? What is it, about 800 pages? All right, to write 3.3 billion base pairs of complex biochemistry and nucleotide biochemistry, that didn't happen on its own. Okay, next person is Leona Helmsley. And Leona Helmsley said, only little people pay taxes. Oh, God. All right. Now, Eloise. This is from the couple Eloise and Abelard. And that's a fantastic story, Eloise and Abelard. I went through the whole thing with my quotes on Abelard. Basically, star-crossed lovers. He was the professor, Aristotelian. She was a young scholar. And things didn't go so well. He wasn't allowed to marry and have a kid with her, or he'd lose his job. So they kind of kept their relationship secret. She got pregnant. Her uncle got pissed off and castrated Abelard. The whole thing is crazy, but it's one of those great Middle Ages romance star-crossed lover stories. Okay, next we're going to do Claude Helvetius. Now Helvetius is kind of like, he's real interesting. He's sort of one of the prototype philosophe, atheistic philosophers of France in the 1700s. And you want to understand these guys because they have a lot of influence in society and they come out at you like they're nice and they mean well, but in reality they're very evil and they cause tons of problems. So I just want you to see the sophistry here. Okay, he was a French philosopher of Swiss origins. He says, all men have equal disposition for understanding. Oh, isn't that thoughtful? No, that's a BS statement, and it's actually, there's evil in it. What he's trying to say is all men are intellectually equal. That's completely untrue. Just as men are different physically, they are different intellectually. They have different intellectual abilities, and of course they have different interests. The only way you can make everybody equal intellectually is you have to cause brain damage in all the smart people. That's not good, okay? But that's exactly what a lot of people want to do. Okay, he says genius comes from sustained attention. Now that sounds nice, but he doesn't really mean it in a nice way. There is truth that real geniuses tend to be very tenacious about learning their field, which they become a genius in that domain. They're not necessarily that smart in anything else, but in their domain, sustained attention, ability, etc., exposure to certain unique opportunities, they become great at it. Okay, then he says, it is the strong passions which impart to us that continuous earnest attention necessary for great intellectual efforts. Okay. Virtue has many preachers, but few martyrs. Okay. Now here's the big quote that set off, major drama in the 1700s. Self-interest based on seeking pleasure and avoiding pain are the only springs of action in man. So what he's saying is nothing matters to man except to seek pleasure and to avoid pain. So he's basically saying man is like a stupid animal, almost deterministic. There's sort of a Hobbesian view of mankind. In modern terms, it would be like a B.F. Skinner behaviorism view of man. You just give him rewards and punishments and you can get him to do anything, okay? And this book actually got him in trouble. He was accused of atheism. The book was publicly burned in Paris. The book was called On Mind. That actually made the book more popular. And he was of a similar ilk as the philosophes like Diderot and Voltaire and Rousseau. Okay? And it was these atheists who destroyed France. Okay? That's what led to the French Rev, 1789, storming the Bastille, and then everything that went through it, including Robespierre, the guillotine, and all this stuff. Okay? And then what happens is other people come along and they try to take this same type of thinking and they try to dress it up and make it sound nice. And so one of the big ones on this was John Stuart Mill. And people say, oh, John Stuart Mill, he wrote on liberty, he wants freedom. No, you don't understand John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill wanted freedom for the British aristocrats. He didn't want freedom for the people of India. He didn't want freedom for the people of Ireland. Okay, so be careful when you hear utilitarianism. I'm going to show you in this next paragraph how you handle utilitarianism. Because utilitarianism does not lead to happiness and better life for all of mankind. What it leads to is a Jeremy Bentham panopticon. Okay, so let me explain. So, it's also been said for communism, the saying is the greatest good for the greatest number, like utilitarianism. And that sounds nice at first, but what does it mean in actual practice? It means if you have 10 men, 9 of them can get together and vote, you know what? We want to eat the 10th man. Let us just, cook him, kill him, cook him, and eat him. All right? Let's just take all his property, all his wealth. And that would be the greatest good for the greatest number because 9 is greater than 1. And that's why you cannot make a happy society based on utilitarianism. It simply works like communism. You scapegoat one group, which the Soviets scapegoated, for example, the kulaks in Ukraine. And then you just brutalize that group and take all their stuff and then share it amongst everybody. You can get all the pros of that atheistic culture to vote for it because they get some of the goods, okay, the plunder. And, what does the Democrat Party want? It wants to kill all the white Christian men and steal all their stuff, and it's using that as a bribe. Look, we'll give you jobs, affirmative action, we'll give you jobs. This is how we can get rid of white Christian men influence in this country. But in the long run, if you ride the tiger's tail, he turns around and he eats you. Okay, so what does that mean? What it means is this leads to destruction and slavery. And it's rather obvious when you study out the long-term consequences of it. And then you say, well, what alternative is there? Isn't that just the way life is, dog eat dog? No, it's not. Christianity says no to that. Christianity guarantees individual rights. Man is created in the image of God, therefore part divine, therefore he deserves to be respected. He's entitled to certain intrinsic rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, property, privacy, okay? And Ayn Rand had said it just as well. She said, not as well, but equal meaning. She said, if you guarantee individual rights, you guarantee all rights. Christ said, that which you do to the least of my brethren, you do unto me. And it has to be that way, that you respect the individual more than all the other influences, more than the money, more than peer pressure, more than conformity, all that stuff, because that's the only thing that makes it work. Because there's always going to be the majority of people that are fragile, weak, helpless, poor, many confused, elderly. They can't help themselves. They can't protect themselves. They're just helpless. So you have to value every human in order to make it work. That's the only way. And it's good to know this because otherwise a lot of young people in particular get tricked into this nonsense and they do terrible, evil, bad things based on these ideologies. And they don't realize it, till after it's too late. So anyways, That was our introduction to Helvetius, one of the philosophs. Hope you found that interesting.